Welcome to the whirlpool of the unsolved. I'm your host, Frank. Thanks for tuning in. Here I talk about unsolved cases, mysteries, unsolved crimes, and more from some of the most popular cases known to the ones that aren't really spoken much about. So I hope you enjoy the show. In today's episode, we will be talking about the keddie-cabin-murders. So before we get into this episode of the keddie-cabin-murders, I want you to know that this is actually going to be a 3-part episode, so make sure you tune in for the next 2 parts coming out next week and then the following weeks. So enjoy. A horrendous crime with blood spilled and splattered in almost every direction. A horror movie in real life. An unsolved murder mystery with the murders happening in a cabin. No, this is not a movie. This is real life. A family that has been decreased in numbers by evil, robbing life as they knew it. Who did it? We may know who it is, but is it really that person? Reasons for this question? No real arrest has ever happened, but yet a confession was given in an unexpected way. Is this truly an unsolved case? Or a case that can be solved, but covered up by God knows who? So this case, the keddie-cabin-murders, is a very intense case. A lot of reading, a lot of watching videos on YouTube and trying to figure out more about this case. And it's a long case, and there's a lot that goes on with it. Just like in a lot of cases, you have some cases that there isn't much information on, and then you have the cases like the Sims family murder and things like that that really has a lot of information, like and then you have those that don't, like for example, what was it, the massacre that I just covered not too long ago. You have some cases that just don't have information. In this case, has so much information, and after researching and reading into this case, there's a lot of questions that I have, and I really feel like this case should have been solved. This shouldn't still be considered an unsolved case, but it is still considered unsolved for a reason, because nobody has been arrested or nobody has taken the hit for this horrendous case. And to be honest, somebody should have, and that's just the truth of the matter when it comes to this case. Nobody has ever been arrested. There has been numerous suspects, and one suspect in particular I feel like should have been arrested with just a note or a letter. But nonetheless, we're here now, and we're going to get into this case. And like I said earlier, this is definitely going to be a 2-part episode, just like the last episode. So hopefully, you enjoy the episode and come back for part 2, because there's plenty of information and plenty to talk about when it comes to this case. So we'll go ahead and talk about the victims of the keddie-cabin-murders. The victims of this horrendous murder were Glennis Susan Sharp, also known as Sue. Everybody called her Sue. So if you hear me say Sue, that's mom for you. Born March 29th, 1945. John Sharp, born November 16th, 1965. Dana Wingate, who was the friend of John, if I'm not mistaken, and a friend of the family, was born February 8th, 1964. and Tina Sharp, born July 22nd, 1968. So just to give you their age, just in case you couldn't do the math real quick, Sue was the mother, of course, and was 36 years old when this tragic murder happened. John at the time was 15 years old, Tina was only 12, and Dana was 16. Now, let's talk about the location of this horrendous incident. So, the location where this tragic and bloody murder occurred was in Katy. I don't know if you pronounce it Katy, but from the looks of it, it's Katy, California, specifically cabin 28, Keddie Resort Road. Now, at this moment in time, the house is no longer at that location. If I'm not mistaken, they tore it down in 2004 or something like that. But this is where the murders did happen. Nonetheless, that was the address. A lot of the houses are still around in that area, but this house was torn down. For what reason, I didn't really look too far into why they knocked down the house, because when I looked in the area in that location, um, it was very rural and the houses looked very old and some of them looked worn down. So that's probably just one of those things. And we know California has a lot of earthquakes and stuff like that. So it could have been because it was just not in stable condition anymore and it had to be knocked down. Who knows? But if you want to research that, you definitely can. But it was knocked down at some point, and I'm assuming, because I think I remember it was 2004. I found that the area, like I said, is rural and predominantly it was woods. Like when you look at the area, I even watched the video. Um, I forgot what channel it is on YouTube, and they were there, and I mean there was woods everywhere they turned. Like I mean woods everywhere, and all the houses were surrounded by woods. The thing is, where the Sharps family home was at, where it was located as well, the houses weren't that far from each other from the looks of it, and there was a lot of woods around their home too. But then again, like I said, the whole entire area is woods. Like I mean, it's I think country is all grass, but this here was all woods. Um, from the photos that I've seen, it didn't look as though they even had street lights, honestly. And if they did, it may have not been many. It probably had a few or something, or probably even the front of the house had lights and they probably turned them on for lights on the street. But I mean, it looked dark. And the video that I watched, I think it was BuzzFeed Unsolved or something like that, that I was watching. And I mean, it was a rainy day when I watched the video and it was dark. I mean, it just looked scary. It looked like a horror movie. It really did. Outside of the outside of the fact that this horrendous crime happened there, it just looked like a scene of a horror movie. It's a very small town, with many of the residents knowing each other, which makes this case very strange, at least to me, that it hasn't been unsolved. Being that this was a very small town where it seemed as though everybody knew everybody. But like I said, the area is an area with plenty of woods in a small town. So you have an idea of the location of where this horrendous crime happened. You can close your eyes and just imagine, like, if you ever watch Cabin in the Woods or a movie like, I think Evil Dead or something like that. That's almost how that area, that location looked. And from watching the video from BuzzFeed, I'm pretty sure it was BuzzFeed, but watching the video, I also got that feeling like a Cabin in the Woods type movie or Evil Dead. It just felt that way, and the houses were really old, and I don't know, it just felt scary, to be very, very honest. Now that we got the location out of the way, let's talk about a little bit of what happened before, and hopefully we have time for this episode to talk about what happened in the murder, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to be able to get all of it in today for sure, at least in this one episode. In this one episode. So, to give you a bit of insight of the family and the situation that led them to where they ended up and eventually had this tragedy happen, I'm going to start with the fact that the Sharp family weren't from California. They were not from California. Sue, the mother, was originally from Springfield, Massachusetts, but she was married to a James Sharp, hence her last name Sharp, which she lived with him and their children in Connecticut. So they originally came from Connecticut. She eventually left her home and her husband in 1979, and with her, she took her children. She left James due to his abuse. So he was an abusive husband. She couldn't take it anymore. She decided to leave, and she relocated to Northern California with her children because she did have a brother that lived and was located in California. Once she arrived, she moved into a small a trailer home that had been formerly rented by her brother Don. So her brother Don actually lived in this trailer home. He had previously lived there, and she ended up renting it out, just trying to escape from James, her husband. So you have this woman that decides to move into California, go to the West Coast with her family to get away from her husband, her abusive husband, and she ends up renting a trailer home that was once lived, who once her brother lived in. She lived there for about a year, roughly a year. The following fall, she ends up moving to house number 28 in the rural Sierra Nevada community of Keddie. So this is cabin 28 that we're talking about now. The house was much bigger than the trailer that her and her children had resided in for about a year, which was that trailer home that her brother Don once lived in. In the house, she clearly lived there with her 15-year-old son, John Sharp, 14-year-old daughter, Shayla, 12-year-old Tina, and two younger sons, Rick and Greg. On April 11th of 1981, Sue, Shayla, and Greg drove from the Meeks family house, which was where their friend lived, to pick up Rick, who was at baseball tryouts in Quincy. And now Quincy is another town that isn't too far from Keddie. The siblings did eventually see John and his friend Dana. So John and Dana, so I was right, John and Dana are friends. They seen them walking at the mouth of the canyon from Quincy to Katy. So they were walking actually from Quincy back to Katy. Katy, I keep messing that name up, but hey, you probably understand what I mean. So they were walking from Quincy to Katy, and they picked them up. They seen them, so they just picked them up. When they basically got back to Katy, they decided to turn back around and head back to Quincy 2 hours later from arriving to Katy. I don't know why, but from what I read, apparently they had plans to possibly meet up with some other friends back at Quincy, which was the reason for them to turn back around. So that's why they turned around. All this happened in the afternoon from roughly about 12 p.m. to 3:30 p.m., which leads them to the time that they were seen in the downtown area. So there were people that said that they had seen John and Dana in the downtown area around this period of time. That same evening, Shayla already had plans on staying over at her friend's house who lived nearby, while Sue remained at home with Rick, Greg, and their friend Justin Smart. Now, remember the Smart last name because there's a lot to do in this case with the Smart family. Shayla left the house to go to her friend's home around 8 at night, leaving her younger siblings and mom at the home. Tina, who had been at the Seabolt's home, which is a family friend's home, one of their neighbors, was there watching TV for quite some time. So the Seabolt's home is where Shayla was heading to, and Tina was already there watching TV, hanging out, and she ends up leaving the home and gets to the house around 9:30 that night after Sheila had got there to spend the night. So Sheila ended up getting to the Seabolt's home, and Tina ended up heading home probably right when Shayla got there. So, and I keep saying Sheila, but I think I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Shayla. Now, now that we got basically all that happened before the horrendous night, we can see that it seemed like it was just another normal day for the Sharp family. Now, when it comes to the boys, John and Dana, I'm not sure if that was normal, just because uh, they had gotten a ride home just to turn back around, and that's the thing that kind of made me question certain things. And then later on, you'll see, um, later on, probably in the second part, we'll talk about some stuff after the murder that really makes me question why did they actually turn back around. And this is me thinking about it right now because I'm reading this script that I wrote and kind of thinking, sometimes we think after we finish something up, and I'm just now thinking about they turned back around to hang around with some friends, and they were in the downtown area. So I'm just thinking about the last little bit of this case and just thinking about this and just putting two and two together. But that's very interesting. Well, most likely, if I don't forget, by the next episode, by the next part. But clearly, they were young, and their reason was a good one. Like they're trying to meet up with friends, especially at their age. So I could understand why they end up turning back. But enough about them and what I'm thinking, because to be very honest, it's really irrelevant at this point in this case, and you'll see why later. Okay. Now, going into the murder, we're now going to get into this murder. And to be very honest with you, I am going to throw this out there. If you're very squeamish and you have a very big imagination and you don't like the thought of blood or anything like that, this is really not the case for you, because this is one of those cases where when I say horrendous, I mean it was horrendous. Like, this is something that you could only picture in a movie. Honestly, you can only picture this kind of imagery in a horror movie or in a violent crime movie. So if you're very squeamish or you're very sensitive to certain things, honestly, here's the warning, okay? Now, going into the murder, it was a very disturbing sight. It really was. Around 7 in the morning of April 12th, Shayla returned to her home, which we know is Cabin 28, and discovered this horrendous sight of dead bodies. So this 12, how old was Shayla? Let's go back and see how old was Shayla, because to be honest with you, it just kills me to just think, just to think that this is even okay for a kid. So Shayla was 14 years old. So you have this 14-year-old young teenager that returns home around 7 in the morning. From what I read, she was heading home because she was getting ready to go to church or something like that. But picture this 14-year-old coming home to this horrendous sight of dead bodies. And not only dead bodies, but it was a brutal, brutal murder. And we'll go into how they found their bodies and things like that. Among them was Sue, John, Dana in the house's living room. All three of them were bound with medical tape and electrical cords. So they were all tied up. And, this case has been one of those where, like, they were teenagers, they were young, and then this mother, and how they were killed was just, only a monster could do something like this. And just thinking about it, because I'm a very visual person, I have a very strong imagination. So doing these cases, um, a lot of times do hurt me in a mental state because it's so profound and the information that you get is so intense. And this is one of them where you can imagine how bad it really was. So Tina, when she got in, she seen these bodies, but Tina wasn't anywhere in sight. But Rick, Greg, and Justin were unharmed in a nearby room. So they were in a room. They weren't hurt. It was just Dana, Sue, and John. Initial reports said that the boys had slept throughout the incident, though it was contradicted later on. After discovering this horrendous scene, Shayla ran back to her friend's house. So later on, it was contradicted. Just want to throw that out, that they had fell asleep through all of this, because we do have Justin, I think it was Justin, who speaks up, and we'll talk about that later on in this case because that goes into evidence and all that stuff. So we'll talk about that later, okay? So after discovering this horrendous scene, Shayla ran back to her friend's house where clearly she had to tell somebody, so she told the Seabolts of what she discovered. Now, Jamie, one of the family members of the Seabolt, went to the home helping the boys that were still in the house to get out through the window, not allowing them to see the gruesome scene. So Jamie went over there, tried to make sure that they didn't see this ugly scene, this horrendous scene. So he goes over there and tries to get them out through the window. Clearly, he doesn't want them scarred for life, because you can only picture young children seeing something like that. Later on, Jamie did admit to having entered through the back door to see if anyone was still in the house. So this is where he messed up, because he potentially contaminated evidence in the process of doing this. You got to understand that when things like this occur and these type of scenes occur, you got to make sure that you're not going into a place like this, because at the end of the day, every little thing can be used as evidence, and the last thing you want to do is contaminate it or even be considered a suspect, because the fact that you have fingerprints and all these things in the crime scene. So if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, call the police immediately. Wait for them to come. And, if you're going to help these children out, I think he did the right thing by helping them out of the window. But at the same time, if you can't get somebody out, just make sure that you tell them to stay calm and to stay there until the police arrive, or whoever has to arrive to help them out, any type of officials, because the last thing you want to do is contaminate anything and put yourself in a position where you're the one to blame for the murders, or the people that have done something illegal to be caught. So just keep that in mind. That's what I'm gonna say. The murders of Sue, John, and Dana, like I said, they were gruesome, they were vicious. It was almost like a horror story, and I'm gonna continue to go back into it being a horror story, a horror movie, whatever it is that you want to consider it, because it was terrible. It was honestly terrible. It was one of those scenes that were horrific. They found 2 bloody knives and 1 hammer at the scene of the crime. One of the knives found was a steak knife that was confirmed to have been used as one of the murder weapons. So this one steak knife was confirmed to be one of the murder weapons. That knife was, from what I seen and from what I read, that knife looked to be bent. From what I read, it said that it was bent about 30 degrees, but it was bent. Now, there was a lot of blood splatter in the living room, indicating that the murders had happened there. And let me emphasize blood splatter, because blood splatter means that there was blood everywhere. Like, I mean, everywhere. Blood splatter, it means that whatever was being done There was blood all over the floor. It probably got on the wall. It was just a horrific thing. Sue was discovered lying on her side and near the living room sofa. She was naked from the waist down and gagged with a blue bandana and her own panties, which had been secured with tape. She was stabbed in the chest. Her throat was stabbed horizontally, wounding the wound going through her larynx. If you don't know what the larynx is, it's the hollow muscular organ forming an air passage to the lungs and holding the vocal cords in humans and other mammals. In other words, the voice box. And yes, I did look that up on the dictionary just to verify and give you complete and honest information. And not only, wounding that, but it also went so deep that it ended up hitting her spine. Now, on the side of her head, there was an imprint of a butt of a Daisy 880 Powerline BB pellet rifle. So it was, I don't know if you know what a BB gun is. If you do, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it was a rifle, the butt of that rifle. There was like an imprint of that rifle on the side of her head. Now, John's throat was slashed, and Dana had multiple head injuries and was strangled to death. Now, strangulation, that's harsh. Like, all of this is harsh. All of it is harsh. All of it. And I don't care who you are, but all of this is harsh and it's sad and it's just very gruesome. And like I said, a warning to anybody that continues to listen into this episode. But you got somebody that's been had her basically her throat stabbed and hit on the side of the head and possibly raped. And to be honest with you, I was looking and it says nothing about her being raped, but I can only imagine having her panties in her mouth and being half naked. Like, I don't know. Honestly, it's sad. And then John had multiple injuries on his head, and Dana just being strangled. Like, strangulation sucked. Like, I think that is the worst death. I wouldn't want to be strangled. Just knowing that the person that's killing you, you're probably looking at them, and it's slow, and painful. It's just sad. The head injuries of both John and Dana, they were caused by a hammer, or in other words, hammers. They don't know if it was just one being used or multiple being used. Now, the autopsy showed that Sue and John had died from the knife wounds and the trauma to the head. So they were both believed to have died due to their wounds, due to the wounds and the trauma to their head. So they suffered. Their death was a suffering death, and that is, I'm gonna keep saying it, sad. And a lot of you probably be like, man, you say sad all the time, but you cannot tell me that when you're listening to this type of stuff, it doesn't sadden you to believe that there's people in this world, there's monsters in this world that are capable of doing this type of stuff. And I like doing this because I love the unsolved fact, and the fact that by us listening and by us researching, it's possible that we may come with an answer or something that we can help officials with to possibly close a case that is considered unsolved. Because more, it's better to have more people come together that care about finding out how these things had happened and who is possibly responsible for it, and closing it out and bringing peace and some sort of comfort to those who lost, their lives, or the family to whose people they lost. It's all those things. So yes, it's sad, and it's just the truth. So clearly, wounds and trauma to the head, possibly meaning that they had a torturous and slow death. And it's the truth. They probably did have a torturous and slow death. Dana had died by asphyxiation, another terrible and slow death. So this is where that is in this case. These are the murders, and now we can see how horrendous they are and for what it is. And, you know, hopefully we, in the second part, we're going to talk about the updates and everything to this case. I don't want to talk anymore because we're already basically a little past our time limit, but make sure you tune in for part 2 of this episode, because we're really gonna get into the investigation, the evidence, and all these things. And I don't want you to miss out on that, because like I said, there's so much that's going on in this case, and it's really worth listening. And I'm hoping that by the end of this year or by next year, this will no longer be an unsolved case, because nobody wants to see an unsolved case forever. We want every unsolved case to be solved at some point in our lives or in general. Okay, so with all that being said, I'm gonna leave this part at that. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Whirlpool of the Unsolved. Check in next week for part 2 of this episode, and make sure that you like the podcast and follow the social media pages: Instagram, Whirlpool of the Unsolved Podcast; Twitter, WOU Unsolved Pod, and the Facebook page. Till next time.